Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is episode number 95 for the 28th of May, Tuesday night in this year of our gaming 2019. As always, I have with me my stalwart companions and co-hosts, Mr. DBQ Hams. How are you doing, DB?
Oh, I'm still awake. Still awake.
And Swiss Guard. How are you doing, Swiss?
Doing well. Got a lot to cover tonight.
Yes. I don't think it'll be that hard, though. Some pretty slick topics, and it was hard to, what we do, just to tell you guys how the sausage is made, is we throw a bunch of news stories into the mixer. We cover, as we always do, the deep dive format is us covering the news from the preceding week. So for us, that is the week of 520 through 524. Plus, we pick up little bits and pieces from the weekend and also things that may have dropped the same day. We triage them throughout the day, and then we collectively get together and decide on what the agenda is going to be for the night. A lot of stuff going on, some high speed moving celestial bodies, and it was hard to pick any to ignore or deny. Lots of E3 news, some legal news, and a lot of financial stuff. And given my own personal criticism of games journalism and podcasts right now, I felt like it was particularly important for us to cover the financial thing, because 99% of my criticisms with a lot of the other podcasts that I personally listen to and journalism that I personally read, my comment when I hear something that I dislike is, man, read an earnings statement every once in a while, why don't you? So it would be remiss for us to do anything less. Let's get things rolling right away with some of the E3 news. And I'm trying to open social media and get all the articles up and blah, blah, blah. So 4 rapid fire topics in the lead up to E3, and we're just going to list them and briefly talk about them and then throw them open for discussion. Number 1, source from GameSpot, Cyberpunk 2077 isn't playable at E3 2019, but new gameplay will be shown. An announcement from CD Projekt Red indicating that they will be showing the game in their primary cinema that they are hosting at E3, that it will be new footage, not what was shown last year behind closed doors, and that the general public will be able to view that video. Additionally, CD Projekt Red has also most recently opened its own online retail store where they are selling merch. And when I swing back to you guys, we can talk about whether or not anybody has picked up on whether or not they're actually selling games through that store. Right now, in fact, and our friend and co-host who is off duty tonight, Osiris Prime, is actually watching this press conference, and I'm sure he will talk about it at the next opportunity. There's a Pokemon press conference going on right now from the Pokemon.
We got some breaking news, gentlemen. Breaking news from the Pokemon press conference.
Yeah, DB, if you want to throw that in, go right.
I will throw it in straight from our correspondent in the field, Detective Osiris Prime himself, trapped in Rod Reynolds' body. So he is saying that there is, let's see, we've got Detective Pikachu coming to the Switch. Pokemon Home, which is going to be a cloud service working between Pokemon Bank on the 3DS and Let's Go and Sword and Shield. So that's their answer to being able to transfer over some of your legacy Pokemon. Pokemon Sleep and Masters announced for mobile. So I don't know that we have any type of gameplay yet on what those mobile ones will be, but that explains that there was a NetEase pairing and partnership with the Pokemon Company announced a few weeks ago as well. So that is breaking news from the press conference of Pokemon. Back to you, sir.
I only
it was
wish
supposed to be a smooth handoff, and then it's silence.
Yeah, that's because we're recording both live and in OBS, and I have to switch back and forth between 2 UIs to unmute. So yes, there we go. News straight from Pokemon. In addition to that, there will be a Nintendo Direct covering Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee on the 5th of June at 6 a.m. Pacific time, so 9 a.m. Eastern. Also in E3 news, from source from Polygon, Derby style roller champions coming from Ubisoft could appear at E3. Footage of a roller derby style game leaks out ahead of industry show. So if you had read an earnings statement recently, you would have read Ubisoft's earnings statement, or maybe even listened to their brief where they indicated, and any of you guys can help me out, that I think that they said that they had 5 AAA games in pipeline yet to be revealed, that would be releasing between now, I think they said either now or E3, and the end of their fiscal year, which I believe is next March. So go ahead, DB.
No, I thought it was 4, but either way, it still kind of gets in there.
Yeah, somewhere between 3 and 5. The conventional wisdom, and I think, and you guys can tell me if you differ, is that is not automatic gimmies that we're expecting. So things that we know is we're not getting another Assassin's Creed. We don't think that list includes Dance Dance Revolution, because that's an expected annualized release that, they don't need to announce it. We know that it's coming. We also know that it is not Skull and Bones. So I will come back to you guys when we discuss these further to talk about what you guys think that might be. This may be one of those 3 to 5 unannounced titles. Some art leaked today, and then there has just been a bunch of speculation and uninformed reports, but supposedly it's going to be available on Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, PC, and Xbox One. Ubisoft's E3 press conference is June 10th at 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern. And finally, in the E3 rundown, and I say this through gritting teeth for the benefit of Swiss, there's a new Death Stranding trailer arriving this week. This story sourced from IGN. There's a new Death Stranding trailer arriving this week. The newest teaser may hint at an online reveal. I'm not even going to talk about that one in any level of detail. Gentlemen, I throw it over to you to discuss at your will. Please entertain us.
I'm going to start and go back to our fact checking here because I said that Pokemon had a deal with NetEase, but it's actually with DNA, the mobile publisher that Nintendo has had a deal with as well. So Pokemon Masters is one game. It is a new Pokemon game for the Switch. Looks to pretend at least to look like a real Pokemon game. And then there's Pokemon Sleep, which, as the headlines are saying, it is a Pokemon game you play while you sleep. So, don't quite know. There's not a whole lot of trailers out there yet. And for fact checking, and for those of you listening, the June Nintendo Direct that Agasicles was referencing is for Sword and Shield, not Let's Go Pokemans. So, got to get all my Pokemon factual accurate in there. So, I'm going to tick it over to Swiss and stop talking for a little bit. Go ahead, sir.
I think it's interesting. We got Cyberpunk 2077 and Death Stranding. Neither seem to be. Well, I mean, they announced with Cyberpunk 2077 no gameplay. Death Stranding doesn't seem to be trending in that direction. So all of these big AAA titles that we've known about for years, seeming to be pushed beyond 2019 and perhaps into a new console generation. I know Agasicles is kind of shudders to think about that, but I think
the news story here, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I think, didn't we know that Cyberpunk wasn't going to be playable? I thought that that part I had read. It was not going to be on the show floor, or it wasn't going to be playable. There was some previous announcement about Cyberpunk not being kind of ready for prime time yet for E3. I think the news to me out of this piece is that there will be new gameplay, which was not something that I expected. I thought they were skipping it because of exactly what you said, Swiss, is that they're prepping for the next console generation.
I mean, I think what we knew, and I don't even know that we knew, the only thing I can remember for certain that CD Projekt Red has said is, and it wasn't that it wasn't this year, it was that that its release was some ways away. It was very indescript, and I guess what I took from it was that it meant not 2019. But I think it's still been within the realm of possibility. So I don't know. I think we still just don't know.
I think that's kind of the recollection, the fuzzy, hazy recollection that I had. And you mentioned the storefront. Isn't CD Projekt Red? Aren't they the ones behind GOG, anyways?
Yes, I believe they purchased GOG some number of years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that'd be where their game could be, right?
Yes. Yeah. So they're probably just selling merchandise to that store.
Beyond that, I don't really have any commentary on Pokemon.
So I think the only thing I'm going to say is on the potentially leaked Ubisoft roller skating, roller derby, Rocket League like type of game. I could see where that could actually be fun. The characters look a little cartoony. They actually look like the character designs out of Starlink in terms of some of those body shapes. So there's some, no surprise, there's some talent across Ubisoft Studios. So it would make sense that they may be similar in their artistic design. But I think Ubisoft's got a good track record of supporting multiplayer games, right? For Honor, Rainbow Six. There's two right there that they've stuck with and revised and have built communities around. So I could see if they market this in a way that comes in and does something a little bit differently. It could be an interesting thing that I was not expecting for E3.
Yeah, look, I'm the first one to put the pom poms up for Ubisoft. So there was a game that released last year that I bought and played that was like a laser tag, like football thing.
Laser League.
Laser League that this
Yep.
feels very similar to, and I just don't know how well it's going to play. Certainly, it could do, with some additional Ubisoft panache thrown behind it, certainly won't hurt. I just don't know that there's enough room in, in game stage for another multiplayer paid thing that's like a weird sport but not quite a sport kind of thing. I don't know. Now, what might be interesting is with Rocket League having been obtained by Epic, you may get a numbers drawdown as you have your entitled people who, maybe I shouldn't say entitled people, as you have your I don't know, industry warriors, justice warriors who are going to insist that they're not going to play the game now that it's owned by Epic. And so maybe those numbers draw down, maybe those people go to Ubisoft Roller. But of course, where do we expect that this game is going to be sold?
That's what I was just going to say. Ubisoft put the Division on Epic Store, so
yeah, they have
yeah.
no. They definitively have a signed deal that I don't know if it applies to all games, but certainly some number of Ubisoft games in distribution pipeline are dedicated to being timed exclusives out of the Epic Store. That is a signed business arrangement between the two. We just don't know exactly how that's codified, for beyond those scant details. So be interesting to see. Yeah, I guess for me it's exciting to. I guess I'm excited to like cross off the list like these unannounced games, right? Until we know what they are. High speculation that one of them is Watch Dogs. Hopes and prayers for Splinter Cell being one of them. This is now one of them, and like I said, we know that one's not Skull and Bones. This is, by the way, this was these 3 to 5 games, however many they are. This was a statement that was said after the announcement of Breakpoint, so it also does not include Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Anything else you guys want to talk about E3?
2 weeks away.
Yeah, getting pretty excited.
All right. Time to move on into legal there, Counselor?
That it is. Even though Prime's not here, we're still going to briefly cover the legal brief.
We are, but we're going to go relatively quick because this is a little combination of legal and political, as most things often are. So we've got a couple things here around loot boxes and one around the escalating fear of a trade war between U.S. and China. So we've got some loot box legislation. So Earlier this month, there was the U.S. Senator who had announced some loot box legislation and pay to win, describing pay to win as anything that would ease a user's progression through content otherwise available within the game without purchase. So, and the crux here is that these would be things that would be regulated or restricted on games that have a primary sale to a minor audience. Now, this is a United States senator, so there's potential that this could get some kind of press conference, but there's so many pieces of legislation that get introduced every year that never even get a hearing at a committee. So I'm not. It'd be interesting to see if this goes anywhere or if it picks up any other traction. But there is some loot box traction that has been picked up over the last year or so over in Europe. Last year we had the Netherlands, which started to regulate loot boxes, and we saw FIFA with EA have to start to disclose some things. We saw Blizzard and Overwatch start to change up some things, and now we've got Nintendo removing 2 of their mobile games from Belgium because of Belgium's new loot box laws. So Animal Crossing Pocket Camp and Fire Emblem Heroes. Fire Emblem Heroes has a big kind of gotcha mechanic. Interestingly enough, it's quite possible that the newly betaed Mario Kart game, which also has a strong gotcha mechanic, may run into the same situation here. But they will be coming off Belgium's stores, off their mobile iOS and Android stores at the end of August. So as laws go into effect, those games will no longer be not even able to download, but and also possible to play. They will no longer authenticate off a server, which means you will not be able to play them either in those countries. So Nintendo, rather than changing up the mechanics within there, has just decided to pull those games within those markets. And finally, the third political, economic, kind of our econ transition story is as the United States president and the president of China have continued to escalate trade and tariffs. Now that there are potentially tariffs of up to 25% that may hit us with game consoles and other things. So there are some tariffs potentially that are in this next wave if things go forward, that things that were not covered by the previous tariffs that would now include things like pharmaceuticals, metal goods, rare earth materials, so a lot of electronics may fall into that, including video game consoles and controllers. So again, as people are thinking about pricing, not only are steel and other types of durable goods going up, but our kind of our luxury goods with video games are also potentially going up. And there is my econ language, all that I remember from this quick off the cuff, my econ lesson for tonight.
Right.
Thoughts about this, or either one of them?
So I just want to put a button on some things you said, just to be hyper specific. So the new list that has been released by the I'm seeing the acronym here, but not the name. I don't know why an article does that, by the USTR, definitively includes video game consoles, game controllers, and coin-op arcade games, as far as we understand it. So those things would be on the list. That means if it's a blanket 25%. Now, what's not specified in here is whether or not. The language in here has proposed a tariff of up to 25%. And I'm sorry, it's the United States Trade Representative.
There we go. You got it as well. Okay.
Yeah, Office of the United States Trade Representative. So it's up to 25% on a wide array of products. So 25% is the worst case scenario, theoretically. So game consoles as a category may not get that whole 25%. I find it interesting, and the on the hot seat question I want to ask you guys is Swiss. PlayStation 5 is $400 MSRP. This tariff raises it to $500. Do you still buy it?
$500? No, but
Okay.
where is like the Nintendo Switch and the PS5 and Xbox, where are they manufactured at the moment? I mean, the article strongly implies China, because the headlines like U.S. considered 25% tariff on game consoles, which is, I mean, it's a little bit misleading because it's like they're considering basically anything from China up to 25%. They spun it for game consoles. And then I don't even know though if the primary game consoles are going to fall under this. Like, part of me thinks, is this just those cases where you have like the knockoff like emulator things, you know? I mean, would the Sony PlayStation fall under this? That's what I'm asking you guys.
As far as we understand it from this article, and gamesindustry.biz, I do consider to be a very highly accurate news outlet for games journalism. So according to this list, they have USTR has released an expanded list that includes products and categories from China. In that expanded list, the product categories of video game consoles, game controllers, and coin-op arcade games are on that list. So as far as I read it, yes, Xbox, PlayStation 5, and Nintendo Switch would be there. Now, admittedly, I can't say for certain that PlayStation
says, I'm sorry, I just did some Googling.
yeah.
It says PS3 was produced in Japan. Sony now outsources its hardware assembling to Foxconn,
Out of
which is
China.
in China.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Now, here's some weirdness and wonkiness. I don't know when this Foxconn plant in Wisconsin comes online, and I don't know how much production would come out of there. That plant, I think, is like is a 5-year plan, 3 to 5 year plan. So
I'm just laughing because I'm in Wisconsin, and yes, there's still questions around that.
we won't get into the freaking.
No, right? And actually, the potential of it as an industry thing is good, but I think the majority of, at least I know for Switch consoles, because there were some shortages at different points in time, that they are assembled in China, and now you're reading that the PlayStation 4 is as well.
It says, okay, I'm sorry, like I'm live Googling because like this is me musing about this article. Foxconn, it's in Taiwan. As far as the United States government is concerned, Taiwan's its own thing, even though China doesn't want to really like that. Like, so these tariffs wouldn't cover Taiwan, would they? We treat them as different entities politically.
Go ahead. Now I'm going to Google. Go.
I don't know. I have always, since time immemorial, right? Like as I mean, and I've covered other parts of like the tech industry, right? So, for instance, the big scandal that dropped for the Foxconn plant for the Apple scandal, right? About the working conditions. My understanding is that was a Chinese plant.
I found an article from the South China Morning Post. Taiwan sees opportunity in U.S.-China trade war, but don't expect a windfall. Economists warn. I don't know. There's a lot of questions. It looks like the Xbox is also manufactured by Foxconn and another company. So
pretty much everything is manufactured by Foxconn. I mean, they are one of the two largest ODMs on the planet, and the other one, I think. Well, TSMC is a foundry, but they may have some manufacturing capability also.
Taiwan-based, the Switch, Taiwan-based Foxconn, Japan-based Hosiden.
Yeah,
Foxconn gets the most volume though.
So I don't. Foxconn has 12 factories in 9 Chinese cities, more than any other country. The largest Foxconn factory is located in Shenzhen, which I think is where, which produces the bulk of Apple's iPhone line. I'm pretty sure Shenzhen was the factory that was implicated in the whole Chinese working condition scandal. So I don't know. I guess I've always thought that ownership line goes through China, but you're right. I mean, it's I think in my mind, what this presents is the possibility that things that we buy for our hobbies could be impacted by these tariffs. And I think the big, like I said, I think the big thing for us to then decide upon is, what is our threshold for continuing to consume products. It's not specific to this. Obviously, I've been heavily reading and monitoring the situation with Huawei as well, for various reasons, which is an adjacent topic. There are in my schizophrenia of the multiple roles that I occupy, both professionally and as a hobbyist. There are slices of me that is a Huawei cheerleader, and then there are slices of me that I'm like, yeah, well, this is just the way things go, and this is what you do. What I find, and we're going to try not to be political. I guess what I'm curious about is because I've also been discussing, not pertinent to journalism or anything, just like in side conversations, times in my life where I was in a role where someone handcuffed me with a set of rules. And often the sometimes sadistic things that I came up with to skirt those rules were often much more damaging than what that regime was trying to prevent. So part of my concerns and part of my interest is in seeing is, I mean, the world's a neat place with all the technology that we have available. But man, what would the world look like if there was a different computing platform than x86 and ARM? What would happen if the world was defined by operating systems other than Windows, Android, iOS? I mean, I don't even throw OS X in that mix because Apple doesn't even really talk about OS X anymore, right? So the political piece, which I was trying not to get into, was, man, when you box people in a corner, they sometimes like squirt free by doing things that you don't expect. And there's lots of talk about Huawei coiling up to, launch their own operating system and nano processors that they have in design pipeline and things like that. And I don't want Huawei to succeed down that path and still be a national security threat, if that's what they actually are. But from as an engineer and a technologist and a lover of things tech, I'm like, man, wouldn't that be really cool if in Europe, right, you all of a sudden had Android, iOS, and this third operating system, right, that could become another potential choice and option for people, and the things that could potentially be enabled through that. So I find that interesting. And who knows, right? Lots of people are getting in on the console game. What happens when prices push upwards to a point where there's not as many people buying Xboxes and PlayStations? Does another alternative arrive on the scene? Does this have the impact of making Google Stadia a more attractive product for people? There's lots of interesting scenarios that could happen from this potential dynamic.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about the streaming aspect of that as well, right? Like if something like this does go through and it impacts things throughout the next year as things are ramping up for sales, I could certainly see where Microsoft could come out ahead of that, because of, if you're really going to be able to stream off of their existing platform, potentially that makes that a different value investment. I would also guess that the Stadia box is probably also constructed in China. So depending on what you need to run Stadia, we'll see what happens there as well. So anything else on these legal, economic, political topics before we bounce to our next set, gentlemen?
No,
just to correct my ignorance real quick. Forbes, I found an article from Forbes how Taiwan would be impacted by these, and it's mostly like there's a lot of companies that are based in Taiwan, but as you said, Agasicles, like they have factories all throughout China, so they're going to be hit the same.
Right. And the interesting thing when it comes to Google and Stadia being impacted in the Stadia box, like you mentioned, DB, is, I wouldn't call this successful, but Google did launch a U.S. manufactured device. I can't remember what the thing was called, the Nexus Q. It was like their first, it was the predecessor basically to the Google Home, essentially. And it was just like a streaming pod box that could stream Google Play music or something similar. And I think it was manufactured in Texas, maybe, or maybe somewhere out on the West Coast. I'm not sure. But it was an exorbitantly expensive device for what it did. So, but Google might have ways to skirt. I'd also be curious, like, and I'm just not sure. A lot of Foxconn manufacturing happens in Brazil, and Brazil is also a place that has been very attractive for people to open up manufacturing plants in, although they don't have the capacity that China or Taiwan does. So again, it'll be interesting to see what things unfold. Swiss, why don't you cue us up and let's talk through where money could be made, not where money could be taken from. I don't know
Money
that
could be
segue
made,
made
or
any sense, but money has
money
been
has
made.
been made.
Has been made.
Totally. I've got some sales figures from the UK. Interesting across a couple of weeks because the number one spot has fluctuated week to week. So for the week ending May 18th, Rage 2 from Bethesda took the top spot in the UK. They bumped Sony Ben's Days Gone, which for the few weeks leading prior had been number one. Mortal Kombat 11. They said it debuted at dropped to number 4. So it must have been trailing slightly Days Gone. So we got Rage 2, Days Gone, FIFA 19, Mortal Kombat 11, Red Dead Redemption 2, and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and Grand Theft Auto. So two top 10 stalwarts in there. And surprisingly, at number 10, New Super Mario Brothers U Deluxe, which interesting. But so that was the week ending May 18th. 1 week later, Rage 2 drops all the way to number 4. Days Gone and FIFA 19 maintain their spots in 2 and 3, but Team Sonic Racing takes the top spot in the UK. So this article from GamesIndustry.biz says Sega's Kart Racer, first Sonic game to top charts in 11 years. So that really surprised me, actually. Rage 2, when it did slide to 4th place, 73% week over week decline in units sold. So initial burst, and there doesn't seem to be much staying power. Days Gone, I think, has done surprisingly well for Sony Bend. I've got like 15 articles open, so I don't know where I saw it, but
Yeah,
I think they said it was
Ben's best-selling game.
best-selling game.
It's
Yeah.
PlayStation first-party number 7 best-selling game. So
despite seem like lukewarmish reviews, I think it's going to be a financial success in a way. I mean, it I don't know if success might be too strong a word, but I don't think it's a steaming pile for sure.
No, and I mean so you look at Rage 2, which is a multi-platform game, sells on all platforms except the Switch, I guess. Striking, just to talk about these 2 weeks of sales, I mean, striking performance from the company that is most recently known for releasing what could be considered a steaming pile, which was Fallout 76 last fall. Rage, also a franchise that comes out of nowhere, not hugely popular out of its first iteration. I played it. A lot of people just didn't get it and didn't see why it was anything special. Largely went ignored. And then Rage 2 kind of comes out of nowhere. And it's hard to tell why, because there wasn't, I don't, in the midst of things like the Division 2, Anthem, I'm not really sure what tipped this over the top from a marketing perspective and an awareness perspective. Although I will say,
Go ahead.
I will say, I mentioned, we talked about it in the chat, how I was kind of flabbergasted that in the walk up to the Days Gone release, that I was like, is that game coming out next week? Like, Sony sure as heck isn't talking about it, but people were talking about Rage 2, so that's pretty interesting and impressive for Bethesda to come into the spring and sweep a week at least for 1 week of sales data.
So I think I found the opposite with Rage 2 of I thought the buzz around it coming out around the release was relatively light. But I think the interesting thing, in addition to that, I agree with you. It's a good showing for Bethesda. That it's a sign of some confidence in players, right? That they haven't poisoned the well to that extent with how they left people with Fallout 76. So that's a really good point, Agassicles. But looking at these 2 weeks of sales, number 2 and number 3 remain consistent, right? That number 2 is Days Gone over 2 weeks, and which means it's been there since the end of April when it released. And number 3 remains consistent with this FIFA 19, which has probably been in the top 10 since it released back in September. So I really, it's the thing interesting about this is you don't see sales numbers, right? Like, how big are the spikes for the 1 week new item versus the months and the weeks and weeks of Red Dead Redemption or Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and obviously Grand Theft Auto.
But what's still at face value still impressive, even without the numbers, is that Days Gone. And granted, it's selling on a system that has an install base of roughly 100 million. Still stays ahead of a lot of things that are multi-platform, and that's almost scary to me, because of those things that, like, I really get concerned and bothered. I mean, quite frankly, when I feel like there are signals being sent to the industry that might be a skewed statistic, right? Like, I don't know that Days Gone is a number 2 best-selling game on its own merits, but because it's a exclusive on a platform that has a 100 million install base, and that install base doesn't have any other exclusives, right? I mean, they have no release dates for Last of Us 2. They have no release dates for, I don't even think they can freaking explain what the heck Death Stranding is. And so if you're a hardcore dyed-in-the-wool PlayStation supporter, and you've played Horizon Zero Dawn and everything from 2018, you buy this game. It's kind of the Halo effect that I used to talk about last generation, where not a lot of exclusives on Xbox 360 per se in comparison to PlayStation 3. However, the ones that do land on Xbox, my binary state was every Xbox owner goes out and buys it, right? So when Halo drops, everybody goes and buys Halo. When Gears drops, everybody goes and buys Gears. So an interesting dynamic, and I gotta love the Brits for keeping Forza Horizon 4 in the top 10 in that second sales week.
That's right. Yeah, no, I think the other piece here is we're not really going to get to the story, but I'll mention it here with the MPD numbers from April, that Days Gone was also number 2 there. And I think it is a sign of that halo effect that you're talking about, Agassicles, because Days Gone released the 26th of April, which was that Friday before the end of the month. So it really only was less than a week of sales within that month to be counted. So a lot of that is people who are invested in that platform and that publisher in terms of Sony. So it'll be interesting to see how long. That's the UK chart piece that is interesting to me, is that looking at reviews and listening to games press, you would think that Days Gone would have spiked and died off because of the 6.5s and all the other review scores. But if they can continue that, then I think it goes back to what you're saying, is that there are other ways to send messages to publishers that are not just through traditional games media.
Right, and that's a game that a lot of streamers streamed, and I don't care if streamers hate me, but I will say streamers stream bad games, right? And I feel that conflates, that muddies the data that comes back. Let's go ahead and skip over to that MPD story, DBQ. So from Venture beat the April 2019 NPD numbers by an analyst who, and with some comments from an analyst who I have a lot of respect for, Matt Piscatella, talked a little bit about Mortal Kombat 11's strength and performance, as well as well, Mortal Kombat 11. First time a third-party published Nintendo Switch game was the platform's top seller since Mario plus Rabbids, which Mario plus Rabbids was at least a first party and a half game. So that was fairly interesting. And of course, we have Sony Ben. So just reading down the chart. Now, the interesting thing to note here is that some publishers provide digital data to NPD. So NPD gets physical sales from the retailers. It also intermixes that with digital data it gets from some publishers. Not every publisher participates. These are also rankings by revenue earned. And so, as far as I understand that statement, and maybe we should dig a little more, but I think that would also include microtransactions associated with a given title, simply because the NPD statement doesn't say that it doesn't.
Is that, or is it revenue for different SKUs of the product? Like MLB The Show had 3 different versions you could buy, right? You could buy the $80, the $100. So the revenue on the $100 one with built-in microtransactions in it would be a whole lot higher than your $60
Right.
game.
So at least some content of surplus content beyond just the core game. One of the things that it also notes here is that Nintendo doesn't share its first-party sales, so it doesn't share stuff from, I guess, from the eShop. They only have those from retailers, which again is remarkable when you see the number of Nintendo titles in the top. Know that that doesn't account for all of them. And Activision Blizzard does not provide its Battle.net sales. So again, in order by revenue, or dollar sales, I should say, Mortal Kombat 11 was first, Days Gone second, MLB 19 The Show was third, The Division 2 was fourth, Super Smash Brothers was still fifth, flipping Grand Theft Auto 5 in at number 6. Help me out, Swiss. Sekiro.
Sekiro.
Shadows Die Twice in at number 7. Call of Duty Black Ops 4 in at 8. NBA 2K19 remains strong at 9, and Yoshi's Crafted World at 10. Dribs and drabs of stuff throughout the top 20. I don't necessarily go through them all, but Red Dead Redemption 2 weighs in. Mario Kart 8, Assassin's Creed Odyssey still selling strong. Help me out. What is the difference between Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which must be on Switch? Oh, never mind. Versus New Super Mario Bros. Ultimate Deluxe. Was that an eShop release?
No, it came out in January. It's the remaster of the new Super Mario Brothers for Wii U
Okay.
and Luigi.
Okay.
Yep.
Breath of the Wild coming in at 17, 2 years after its release. Interesting. Battlefield 5 in at 19, and Borderlands, which must include the original / the
The remaster, yeah.
remaster thing in at number 20. Still impressive, and obviously had a lot to do with 2K's recently stated levels of success, which we talked about on our recent show. So anything else that you guys wanted to mention from the NPD numbers?
No, again, I think the surprise to me is Days Gone and MLB in terms of being single party or single platform games. Smash Brothers doesn't really surprise me. I'm surprised that it's number 5, I guess. Be interesting to see how some of these things hold on. I think it's a good showing for Sekiro. And I wouldn't be surprised if NBA 2K takes another jump up higher in the top 10 in May just because of NBA playoffs and some additional discounts that they've been selling the game for. So,
When is Red Dead Online supposed to hit?
Well, it's out. It's just technically transitioned out of beta, I think, sometime this month.
Okay. I'd be curious to see if Red Dead Redemption 2
bumps up
in the top 10.
Yeah, there's something weird with that game and its dynamic where even though they tried to get, lightning in a bottle to happen twice, Red Dead just doesn't seem to have the traction that Grand Theft Auto 5 does, and maybe that's just because it's been years of building up that content basis in GTA 5. I'm not sure. And I do take that back. So yeah, microtransactions I'm pretty certain are not included into this. Otherwise, potentially things like Apex and Fortnite might be in there if anybody was sharing those revenue data sets. Um, Speaking of which, let's talk about Apex and the fact that its revenue has been down 74% in the last 2 months. EA's Battle Royale, this story sourced from Game Industry Biz. EA's Battle Royale title shows second month of steep digital revenue decline, falls out of PC and console top 10. So maybe we'll get an understanding from this where that data gets reported. Apex Legends earned $24 million in April. This from a tracking company named Superdata, which is down significantly for the second month. And I think these guys are just looking at some data and running in their own estimates off their own internal engine. They had digital revenue in February at 92 million. Still, 92 million from a single game free to play in 1 month is still pretty significant. And then when you consider over 2 months, that's 116 million. There are publishers that would kill to have a game that sold that much. It looks like their predictions are an assessment is that the game took a hit in April with the coming out of Mortal Kombat 11, because you probably have a lot of players who play Apex who are also in that Mortal Kombat 11 camp. I don't know. Anything that you guys glean from this article and this decline?
I think it goes to your point about what we are signaling to what consumers signal to publishers. While, like you said, 74% down in sounds bad. I mean, $92 million in 1 month is going to be pretty tantalizing to be able to kind of throw together like another battle royale type free to play style game. And I don't like those types of games, and I'm finding like a weird tension where I don't want to dictate to other people like what types of games they should like, but it feels different to me than just me saying, well, I'm not really that into fighting games or racing games, and they're great. I'd like people to keep in making them so that those people that are into that can play it. These just it feels cheaper, like with each round of games that come out. Like PUBG, going from PUBG to Fortnite felt like a step down in a way. Now I know PUBG had a lot of bugs, but it looked like a modern shooter kind of. They were small. They were a company that were trying to go for it. They didn't quite attain that, but it looked like that level of quality. And then Fortnite came out, and the initial reaction was very like, man, they're just trying to like cannibalize some of the PUBG hype. And while Epic's been throwing a lot of digital content in there, I've seen an article recently about, oh, now we can buy Nike Air Jordans in the game. It's like ridiculous where this is going, but still, it just feels like the underlying gameplay structures are just getting reduced with each time. Like Apex Legends, yeah, it's a game, but again, it just feels like there's less and less effort put into it with each iteration.
Less and less meat on the bone, and I mean, I don't. May as well just throw it out. I don't feel like it's a game. I fully agree with the Halo. I think it's Halo Infinite's creative director, I think is his role, who said Battle Royale is a mode. It's not a game. As you mentioned, Swiss, what it feels like, and if you look at the level of detail, I think between PUBG to Fortnite to Apex, production and quality is increasing, but in general, there's not as much meat on the bone. You also look at who's getting involved in the industry and how it tilts the story. PUBG, small, scrappy developer trying to cut into the industry with a new concept, duct taping the thing together and making it work. That's a story to rally and get behind. Fortnite is Epic, a company which would have been completely fine selling nothing but the Unreal Engine, who created a cartoony looking Team Fortress kind of artistic style game that is reflective of PUBG's design. And I'm not saying that Epic copied them. I don't think that's even important. The fact of the matter is that here's the rich kid on the block, right? This is the rich kid on the block who learns to play guitar, right? Does he really need to become a rock star? No, he's already a rock star, right? But he sees this new fad and he goes after it. Then your third iteration is one of the biggest kids on the block. EA jumps in, takes quite frankly, arguably their darling company from a design chops perspective, right? The guys who created the whole multiplayer, modern warfare shooter craze, right? From a creative direction standpoint, and you give them the license, or you give them the freedom, or however you want to say it, to create Apex. And yeah, there's part of the story that these guys kind of garage banded the thing together of their own initiative and accord. Fine, but each time it's like, is that really a story? Like I just kind of like everybody rah-rahed Respawn making Apex, and I'm like, I fully expect that a studio like Flippin' Respawn should be capable of putting something like Apex together. It's not that complicated when you think about the overall design spectrum or design span of what Titanfall 2 had to cover, the ground it had to cover. Apex, in my mind, is a smaller game from an engine, physics, gameplay, code integration, and interactivity standpoint. Yes, you have more dynamics and predictive physics that you have to put into it because you got more players playing. But again, they already did that with Titanfall, right? I mean, with Titanfall multiplayer. So the story becomes less and less of a thing, in my opinion. And I guess I want to, and I know I said one thing, Swiss, and then you agreed with it. Now I'm kind of walking it back. I hope the signal that's actually being sent is publishers start to question whether or not if the development cycle, and this is my guess, if the development cycle for a big open Anthem like the Division 2 thing is a 3 to 4 to 5 year development cycle, and putting together something like Apex is a 12 to 24 month development cycle, and there's a get rich quick element to it with microtransactions. I hope people start to look at this and go, yes, but once you get that thing out, it's not like we're looking at games in the NPD top 20 that came out 2 and 3 years ago that are still in the top 20 because they're great games. Some of those games don't have microtransactions. They're just great games that people are still buying. And those rankings are by dollars. So it's not like those are $5 discount bin games. I'm hoping people start to look at that and go, at least we can't just make everything a 18 to 24 month dev cycle get rich quick scheme. We've got to continue making meaty games with tons of content, with big stories and big creative direction. DB, you've been chomping at the bit. Go right ahead.
I don't know that I've been chomping. Well, I guess I have, actually, because lots of things. But first, I want to go back to what you just said right there at the end of making big games with big meaty stories that take long development cycles. I would like to introduce you to the BioWare devs that have been silent for the last month as Anthem has been Anthem, right? Like there are games that have gone that path that have not been in the NPD top 20 for more than their first month. Right? So I don't know that is a success either. The piece here, there's two things that I want to. One, I want to rally the Battle Royale flag since Prime is not here, because I do think that one, I'm not going to disagree that it's a mode. I think Fortnite could also be called a platform for as much as they've played around with different modes within there. But at the same time, that you have, they've created something very slick. They've created something relatively unique in terms of the mechanics that go into it, at least in Fortnite, where you have the building aspects. And Apex shines a lot of things up and smooths off some of those edges. At the same time, and I said that twice now, I know, but I want to make the point of that this story is about revenue and not about profit. right? That we have other stories out there, even this week, that talk about how much EA paid streamers to play Apex, right? What we don't know is what the marketing budget for Apex was. That if they made $92 million, you know, maybe I'm sure they invested some back in, but the marketing budget would have been something. But at the same time, a month later, I don't know that the marketing budget is the same, right? If they've scaled that marketing budget back a significant amount as well, then potentially their profit margin has not drastically shifted. I think so that's the positive piece on the Apex side. I think when I read this, the piece that also made me think about is it goes back to your points as well, is how many people are chasing after that Fortnite model. And Apex has been getting hit in terms of within social media of not being, not having an update in a while, not being really responsive in terms of balance, coming out with new content or new pieces. Epic has Epic money, right? They have Unity money to be able to dedicate to that. Where other developers, there's not that same model.
Unreal money. Just
yes, Unreal money.
I know you know. I just don't want anybody like flipping out.
Thank you. Yes.
So yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? Because man, yes, a couple points on your points. I don't know that the marketing budget for Apex was anything other than paying those streamers, because they literally did one press conference, dropped the game, paid a bunch of streamers, and then they've done a couple like not even press releases, right? They've done interviews, and that's where they've dribbed and drabbed things out about what's coming for Apex, and then everything else has kind of been in game. The question that's left on the table is, so these amounts are what they're earning, but it's also a constant input mill, right? You're maintaining a cadre of developers who are continuing to work on that game as their full-time job all the time. So they're burning $100, $200, $300, $400, $500 per labor hour, right? Loaded or fully burdened, or however you want to play it, right? And that's a constant grist mill that needs to be keeping up with however much money you're taking in. Again, I go back to this NPD list of things that I'm looking at. Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Assassin's Creed Odyssey has DLC and maybe some minor microtransactions. I still think of that largely as a core single player game. Red Dead Redemption 2, Yoshi's Crafted World, Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. I mean, now we're getting into some more recent games, but just looking at these games that released like years ago, I mean, if Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild is still making number 17 money for Nintendo, and Nintendo's not even reporting all of the revenue gained from digital purchases of Legend of Zelda, like that's incredible. I mean, but again, that's Nintendo, so everybody may not be able to do that. But yeah, it's an interesting choice that these companies have to make. Again, I have hope that that publishers start to see some of the strength and benefit from longer term development games having more staying power on the NPD charts. And we won't get into my debate with you on Apex. That's just the do loop of the like loot for 10 minutes and get in a 1 minute firefight still kind of confounds me for the people who enjoy that game, but that's fine. And like you said, Swiss, just to get back to what you mentioned, for me, it's never been a matter of, I completely agree with you. It's never been a matter, and it never, let me reemphasize, anything I've personally said, and I think this probably counts for all of us, it's never been a matter of being angry about the games that people like. That's never the matter. The matter for me has been what the industry and games media and social media tries to claim that people like, when that doesn't necessarily synchronize and harmonize with what you see from the NPD rankings, from earnings reports, and from what for me is the front page of Metacritic and the aggregated review scores, or if you don't like Metacritic, if you've got a religious problem with them, with what Steam reviews say, for instance. The problem I have is when those things are out of skew and people go, yeah, Apex is the best thing ever, and I'm like, but its revenue's not matching up with these other single player games that are also critically acclaimed, and that people are talking about their earnings reports and that are on the front page of the Steam store. So I don't know, gentlemen. We covered the entire breadth of the industry in a single hour or more. Anything else that you guys want to add?
Yes, I just want to hit on the one story that really probably surprised me this week is Metro Exodus making back its money, right? Is that it in 2 months it's made back both its development and its marketing costs. As we've been talking about development costs and marketing costs with Apex and others, I was just surprised at this, right? That this seemed to be not a big game. It didn't make a huge social media splash. It did not even make a big review splash, but it's sustainable, right? I think that ties back into our conversation around Days Gone as well, is that even if it doesn't necessarily review well, it may be sustainable enough to count as not a failure and to keep the games moving forward.
Although this game did review well, it's an 80 or above aggregate score on Metacritic the last time I looked at it. So it was neck and neck in contention for my purchase last month or this month between it and the Division 2. So it's like an 82. It's like an 82 on Metacritic, I think. But your statement stands, right? It's very interesting that this is THQ Nordic published. It is a team that has the same level of pride that Crytek used to have in like making a lavishly beautiful game that brings a lot of PC gaming rigs to their knees when they try and crank up all of the detail. It's a multi-platform release on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox, and they just quietly, like you mentioned, put their nose to the grind, produced a great game, didn't thump their chests about it at all. It doesn't get a ton of support from streamers, yet it has this type of financial performance. So I think I would tie it back to my statement of it's like don't believe the hype, right? To take it back to the 80s or 90s, right? It's not always about the hype. It's not always about the games that people proclaim are great games. Like I said, everybody rah-rahs Apex and how great it is. I'm like, this is proof that this is a great game, right? So
it's interesting with this one. It doesn't say this kind of made headlines a few months back, if you remember, because they went Epic Game Store exclusive for the PC, and they didn't mention how much of those sales came from the Epic Game Store. However, the article does say that a majority came from consoles, and it performed strongly on both the Xbox One and the PS4.
Yeah, just really crazy. Again, this is kind of the same thing as the Rage 2 story, right? Like it doesn't. I mean, the Metro series is well known. It's so hugely popular on Steam with all of its discounts that it's had, but like that's kind of. I mean, really, PC gamers are really the only people who really even know about this franchise because it's so constantly on the Steam front page. It's a really beautiful development story of, again, people putting a lot of meat on the bone and just doing the work, and trying to figure out a way to phrase this politely. The first thing that leapt to my mind isn't in sync with the way we try and normally behave on the show. It's not a bunch of hoopla, right, and a bunch of shenanigans. It's just a great game. And it was marketed as such and sold as such. And yeah, there was some wailing and gnashing of teeth because I think this was one of the games that you could pre-order it on Steam, but then I think they shifted it to the Epic Store exclusive after the fact.
Yeah, but they honored all the pre-orders then as
Right.
well.
Right. So, yeah. I will also say probably a thing that played in their favor, the third or fourth game in a franchise with a lot of people who were dedicated to seeing how the story ends. So I think that also also pay for their right. If Avengers Endgame all of a sudden only is only shown in AMC theaters, even though you're a diehard Regal Cinema fan, you probably go to the AMC theater to go ahead and see the last movie. So, anything else that you guys want to cover? It has been a great show and a great night.
It has been. Thanks for leading us through all this for what should be a quiet time in the lead up to E3. We've had plenty to talk about.
Yeah, I certainly did not expect us to have to come up with the tactic that we came up with to kind of, in some ways, go back to the old rundown format, just to get through it all. But it was hard to not talk about E3 stuff 2 weeks out, and it was hard not to talk about financial stuff with all the business goings on of late. So if you guys don't have anything else, I'll say to the listeners and the viewers, thanks so much for joining in on the show. We do appreciate you. We will be back here next week with, I guess, the first GX show of June. And then the week after that, we roll into our E3 coverage, which I think right now is planned to be 2 megasodes. So 2 slightly longer episodes where we will aggregate and collapse basically the first half of E3 and the second half of E3 into 2 shows. So we get it all done in 1 week, unlike in years past where we've strung it out over 2 or 3 weeks in order to get it done in between our recording schedule. So other than that, thanks so much for joining in. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Happy hunting. Stay safe out there. Play the games that you love and come here to talk about all the games, whether you love them or not. I don't know. Until next time, we will talk to you guys later. On behalf of my co-host DBQ and Swiss and even Prime, who's not here, that's going to do it for us. We're out.